what happened in the events in Jerusalem were on Monday, on Holy Week. And this is a little short passage from this book called Stages on the Way. It's called It Was on the Monday. It was on the Monday that religion got in the way. An outsider would have thought that it was a pet shop fire sale, and the outsider in some ways wouldn't have been far wrong. Only it wasn't household pets. It was pigeons that were being purchased. And it wasn't a fire sale. It was a rip-off stall in a holy temple, bartering birds for sacrifice, and the price was something only the rich could afford. No discounts to students, pensioners, and disabled. Then he, the holiest man on earth, went through the bazaar like a bull in a china shop. So the doves got liberated, and the pigeon sellers got angry, and the police went crazy, and the poor people clapped like mad, because he was making a sign that God was for everybody, not just for those who could afford him. He turned the tables on Monday, the day that religion got in the way. This last week, I tore out 3 pages from a magazine called The Week, and in it were articles about, directly or indirectly, about anger, and all about men, of course. The first was an abrasive boss was resigned from KPMG, and he resigned because of his abrasive nature and attitude towards his staff. The second was a review of a book called Fall. It's about Robert Maxwell, and you all know what he did and the disgrace that he brought upon himself. And the third article was about Neil Woodford, and if you invested any money with him, you'll know how much he lost, which in total was nearly £15 billion. Well, it's all about anger, of course. Many thanks to those who replied to my request for comments on anger. Alison has sent you a summary of the responses to the first question, what makes you angry? I will try and weave in the responses to the second question about how you cope or deal with anger. But I regret that I haven't been able to include all the ideas you suggested. My house shall be called a house of prayer. The story of Jesus dramatically throwing out money changers and selling off birds sticks in our minds, probably because his action was so much in contrast to the rest of his life. The picture that we have of Jesus is someone who performed miracles and told memorable stories. The calm Jesus, not the angry man portrayed in this reading. There was a church poster for Lent that depicted Jesus as Che Guevara, with the strapline, Jesus, meek and mild, if only. It is important to know that Jesus went away to make a whip. He didn't react when he first arrived at the temple. That means he did it in a calculated way. He, in a sense, counted to 10 before acting. He had time to think through his action beforehand, so it wasn't in a fit of temper or rage. Imagine Jesus coming to St. Mary's and doing something similar. It would be quite shocking, but he wouldn't need to, would he? The people in the temple deserve Jesus' wrath because of their inappropriate use of God's house. It's easy to point the finger at others, to see the speck in their eye, and to be blind to the plank in ours. We must try and ensure that we don't become like what we deplore in others. Whereas righteous anger is legitimate, anger can too often be self-righteous, a way to justify our actions. We should take a step back from being critical of others, as we don't always know what is happening in their lives. All 4 Gospels recall this incident. All but John record Jesus quoting from the Old Testament, "My house shall be called a house of prayer." Christians in the first century, once they had been thrown out of the synagogues, met to worship in one another's homes. For the first 3 centuries, Christians were a persecuted minority. It would be surprising if they were not angry with their persecutors. Anger can come out of fear. We should recognize our anger might be driven by our anxieties. There came a time when there was not enough space for the early Christians to meet together in homes. Churches began to be built to accommodate growing numbers. The concept of a holy space somewhere set aside to worship our Creator has long been part of a desire of the human heart. Churches that have been cared for and prayed in for centuries have a special feel to them, an almost tangible sense of awe and reverence, rest and peace that has accumulated over years. On a wet Saturday afternoon with nothing else to do, a young family visited a cathedral. "What's this? What's that?" kept on asking the children. Big tombs with oversized replicas of long dead saints were a particular fascination. Eventually they came to the sanctuary area, which was cordoned off with a polite notice which read, "Please do not enter." "Why is that, Mum?" asked Johnny. "Because God's in there and he doesn't like nosy little boys disturbing him." Maybe she half believed her own answer. There is something sacred about the sanctuary from where communion is administered and people are blessed. But of course, the whole building should be regarded as somewhere special, set aside to worship God. The whole church building is a house of prayer and should be treated accordingly. People come to church for a whole variety of reasons, one of the most important of which is to pray, through collective prayers and privately for personal need. Many of the responses I receive mention prayer as a key way to deal with our anger. Whether it's offering our deepest feelings to God or our burning desire to rectify a wrong, we should bring them to God in prayer. Meditation, deep breathing and yoga can also help us to have a better perspective on life. Crying can release tension and frustration. Choosing good friends, being part of a supportive community, reduces the likelihood of anger taking control of our lives. It is all too easy to let some small grievances grow out of proportion. Irritability can ferment anger. We must try to see things in perspective. But we have to accept that there are some intractable situations which may never be resolved. We should also try and let go of those things that we have no control over. One notice board outside the church has a poster which reads, "Do come in. Trespassers won't be prosecuted. They will be forgiven." Forgiveness can so often be hard to do. The vicar resigned because she couldn't forgive her daughter's killer. Others have dug really deep and decided to forgive some terrible wrongs. Hanging on to bitterness and anger can so easily become self-destructive. A reconciling approach to personal conflict will often reap rewards for everyone. It doesn't mean you have to accept all the blame for the breakdown of a relationship. Pointing out to the other where they may be wrong may be hard to do, but should lead to a fairer outcome. Another child, this time on his way home from school on his own, decided to call into his local church to look around. When he arrived home, he told his mother he had been to see God's house of prayer. "Oh," said his mother, "did you see God?" "No," replied the boy, "but I did see his wife scrubbing the floor." I suspect that there were a lot of women employed in cleaning the temple. When Jesus threw out the money changers, he was concerned that the spirit of worship and prayer had been severely compromised. "Leave this place," he said. "You must not turn my Father's house into a market." It is the same concern for reverence and the spirit of worship which touches those who are so careful about their own churches, especially certain parts of it. It's a concern that we should all share. In some communities, the church is the only building of size and is only used for a few hours a week. It is right that such buildings should be treated rather like a small boy was made to regard in the sanctuary. Is it right? Must we give the impression that God is in there and doesn't want to be disturbed, except during the hours of worship each week? In some communities, the church serves a multitude of purposes. School assemblies are held there, meals are eaten there, parties are enjoyed there. Would Jesus have entered there with a whip to throw them out? Probably not. Having coffee and tea after a morning service in churches raises some eyebrows. Selling tier funds fair trade products caused lively debate when I was a vicar. Some asked, is this the right thing to do in God's house, especially on a Sunday? Our concern for the spirit of reverence in God's house is a good thing, as long as it does not give the impression that God himself is unconcerned with the life of the community outside of the church building. The account of Jesus cleansing the temple should not be used against those whose church buildings are used in appropriate ways. The selling of pigeons and changing of money are very different from the sort of uses that some Christians now use their churches for. Nevertheless, we must be careful about the use of God's house. We cannot treat it like an American who was admiring the cathedral in Salzburg while smoking a large cigar. He was asked to reverence God's house and replied by grinding his cigar into the floor and storming out. Inappropriate behavior has to be called out, in some cases recorded and reported to the appropriate authority, in order to try to create a harmonious society. Writing to MPs or signing a petition to right wrongs influences the way we deal with injustices. Sometimes it is necessary to persevere over a long period to right a deep-seated wrong. Wilberforce spent decades pushing for the abolition of the slave trade. A few responded to my inquiry by telling me that bad manners made them angry. But did you know that Wilberforce's other political passion was to bring back good manners? The claim that God is present in church does not mean that he does not want noisy boys disturbing him. For if he really is there, he is not the dead saint in the tomb who cannot be disturbed, but the living God for the whole of his people, Sunday through to Saturday. And maybe, especially for the little boy who felt there was important things to know about God's house. God said through Jesus, "My house shall be called a house of prayer." May we remember that is the first and foremost reason for every church's existence. Amen.